And good morning once again, Third Church family. So happy for you to be here with us. Today we're going to continue our study in parables, and today's lesson brings us to Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. So let's go there now. Then Jesus told his disciples of parables to show them that they should always pray and not give up. He said, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared about men. And there was a widow that was in the town who kept coming with the plea, grant me justice against my adversary. For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care about men, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so that she won't eventually wear me out with her coming. And the Lord says, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will God not bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? May God add a blessing to the hearer, reader, and doer of his holy word. And I want to use for a subject for our time here today, is prayer worth it? Is prayer worth it? Dear God, my brother still does not have a job. Dear God, my sister still doesn't have a date for the prom. Dear God, my grandmother's still sick in the hospital, and I'm tired of praying for my family and not getting any results. You know, probably all of us have felt this way at one time or another regarding our prayers. Each one of us has probably felt like quitting and not praying at all, felt like giving up on seeing answers to our prayers in the affirmative. Probably more of us, and a few, have actually just stopped praying. Maybe not altogether, but we've quit praying for certain things that God has laid on our heart, things that are important and not trivial, things like giving up on praying to seeing that a loved one is saved or that they return to Christ. Things like having a marriage restored. Things like ministry being successful, sickness or infirmity healed, or an urgent need met. We quit praying because of discouragement and doubt. We quit praying because we sometimes wonder, is prayer worth it? Even though we would never voice these thoughts or concerns, the idea sometimes comes into our mind. So John chapter 18 opens with Jesus telling his disciples a parable. This parable of Jesus concerning the place of prayer is followed immediately by his warning concerning the second coming. This is purposeful because I believe he knew that one of the dangers his followers would face was to become discouraged as they waited for his return. He thus links his words about the need to be watchful to the words concerning prayer. Our persistence in continuing an activity is tied to the value of the outcome. Did you hear that? Our persistence in continuing any activity is tied to the value of the outcome. See, we continue to work because with persistence, there will be a check coming. We're persistent in education because with persistence, there will be a degree coming. But if this is the case, the question is, why are we not then more persistent in prayer? Do we not believe with persistence that change is coming? Deliverance is coming. Our breakthrough is coming. Healing is coming. A better relationship with God is coming. Forgiveness is coming. Well, I stand before you today to say, beyond the paycheck, beyond the degree, or whatever you're being persistent in doing right now, that persistent in prayer is worth it. And I want to encourage your persistence in prayer by stating the reasons that we should never give up and never stop praying. Number one, don't give up because there's too much at stake. Don't give up because there is too much at stake. So Luke does not leave us guessing as to the point that Jesus intends to make. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. The phrase should always pray is really not quite strong enough. See, prayer is not something that we are just permitted to do if we please. See, the Greek verb day here is used, and this is an active present form of dion, which carries a meaning of must in addition to being necessary. So the phrase should be translated must. They must always pray, as to say, prayer is the lifeblood to the Christian life, and without it, there will be spiritual death. Furthermore, Jesus says that men always must pray, and it is translated in the King James Version, not faint. The word faint is used to describe a believer who loses heart and gets discouraged, that they want to quit. And the meaning seems clear. The choice is ours. If we don't pray, then we will lose heart. If we don't pray, we will lose heart. Who among us has not felt like, since our prayers are not being effective, we might as well just quit? But perhaps the question that we should consider is this: what happens to us when we give up on prayer? There are two characters in this parable that we are introduced to. The first one, in verse 2, he says, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared about men. So the first character we're introduced to is the judge. We are told up front that this judge does not care about God, does not care about men. He is moved neither by fear of God nor by compassion for his fellow man. Today we would say this person could not have cared less. So to understand this story, we need to understand its New Testament setting. So this courtroom was not a fine building, but it was a tent that was moved from place to place as the judge covered his circuit. The judge, not the law, set the agenda. And as he sat regally in his tent, surrounded by his assistants, anybody could watch the proceedings from outside, but only those who were approved and accepted could have their cases tried. This usually meant bribing one of the assistants so that he could call the judge's attention to your particular case. This is still true in much of the third world countries today in our planet. We may feel at times that persistence in prayer is a worthless endeavor. It's a fruitless activity. But I'm here to tell you it's too much at stake to stop. The judge in the story can represent any opposition to your prayer life, whether it's frustration, doubting thoughts, lack of faith, whatever would discourage your prayer life. But again, is the outcome worth being persistent? The answer is yes. There is too much at stake. There's a marriage at stake. There's a child's fate at stake. There's healing at stake, employment, finances. The ministry that God has placed in our care is at stake. The other salvation is at stake. The strength to do God's will is at stake. The ear to hear God's will. There is too much at stake to stop praying. Number 2 this morning, don't give up when circumstances seem to be against you. The next character introduced in verse 3 is a widow. Verse 3 says, and there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, grant me justice against my adversary. As a widow, she had several factors stacked against her. First of all, she was a widow. She had little standing before the law. In a society in that day, a woman did not go to court. The widows are a segment of society that was often oppressed, taken advantage of legally. And secondly, because she was a widow, she did not have a husband to stand with her in the court. Finally, since being a widow and being poor were almost synonymous, she had no means to pay a bribe, even if she wanted to. We're not told the circumstances of her adversary or how she was being oppressed, but we are told that the oppression was unjust. And as hopeless as her situation must have seemed, she was persistent. The language of verse 3, present tense verb in the Greek, is used here, indicated that every day she begged this man for help. And the language leaves open the possibility of confrontation everywhere. not just in the court. She may have pleaded with him in front of his friends, in front of his colleagues. She may have confronted him in the street. She confronted him in the market. She called him out at his home. She was not going to be denied. And we should have such perseverance in our lives, especially when we feel that we only have one option. You know, several decades ago, the market crashed, and we looked at the perseverance of millions of people calling their banks to save their home, calling constantly because they were desperate. It was a desperate time, and it was called for focused attention, and they persevered in trying to save their home. You see, her only option was to keep asking the judge to help her. She had no other alternative, and by that same token, I do not think that we will ever really pray, and especially keep on praying, until we come to the place of complete desperation and have no other plan or no other recourse. Are we desperate enough to be persistent in prayer? That's the question this morning. This country we live in, and all of the things that we have and access to things, it appears that we have a lot of options. Therefore, when it comes to prayer, prayer then becomes one of many options to be considered, but it's the least employed in a situation until all other options are exhausted. So when an issue comes up in our life, what do? We take the 50-50. We phone a friend. We poll the audience. We want to Google it. We want to look forever anywhere that we will find help before we head to our knees. Why? Because we have a thought that we're going to make God proud by doing everything on our own so we can say, see, God, I did it without you. But we want to turn around and come to church and exclaim that we can do nothing apart from God. That doesn't make any sense. With prayer being an option, then our prayer life is just situational. When prayer is just an option, our prayer life becomes situational. Meaning until a situation arises that I feel I need to pray about it, then I won't pray. And we have learned before, our relationship with God is a reflection of our prayer life. If we don't have a lifestyle of prayer, then we need to stop with all of these statements about how much we love the Lord. Because for those we love, communication with them is a lifestyle, not an option. And we know what kind of relationship we have with someone. If they only call when they need something, that's no relationship at all. When we truly believe that God is running the world and we can do nothing apart from God, then we will see ourselves as totally dependent on God, and I will then live a lifestyle of prayer. And furthermore, circumstance, obstacles, listen, nothing will be able to silence my prayers or diminish my persistence in prayer, because through prayer, I am reassured that nothing can come against me and win. Being persistent in prayer is worth it. So we shouldn't give up just because, number 3, my answer may just be around the corner. My answer may just be around the corner. According to verse 4, the judge finally became weary of her constant petition. Verse 4 says, for some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care about men, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so that she won't eventually wear me out with her coming. Although the judge keeps refusing, she keeps coming. Today we may translate the judge's statement that the widow troubles me in verse 5 as she's wearing me out. A literal translation of this phrase is she blackens my eye. Probably in the sense that her persistence, she is giving his reputation a black eye. The judge is finally moved to help her, not out of a sense of justice or compassion, but of self-preservation. We get discouraged at times when the person that needs to be moved is not a believer. We get discouraged at times when the person that needs to be moved is very unjust. We get discouraged at times when the person in our life that needs to be moved is oppressive and ungodly and unholy. Again, if we believe that God is running the world, don't you think that God can and will use others that don't believe to bring about the blessing and breakthrough for those who believe? Guess what? God will use that unbelieving supervisor. God will use that unmerciful loan officer. God will use that racist instructor to bring about our deliverance, our blessing, our breakthrough. We just have to believe and be persistent in prayer, believing not only that God can, but God will for my situation work all things out for my good and to his glory. And I'm not talking about a hoping and a wishing, a doubtful kind of prayer. I'm talking about praying with confidence that it's already done, living my life in deliverance before deliverance comes, living promoted before promotion comes, living healed before my healing comes. We have to be persuaded that circumstances will not wane my faith or extinguish my prayer life. To God be the glory, because help is not just on the way. Help is already here. And listen to this. Don't make the mistake of equating delay with denial. Don't make the mistake this morning of equating delay with denial. In verse 7, Jesus makes the application. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? But let us understand, Jesus is not comparing God to an unjust judge. Rather, he's making a point by contrast. Unless we see Jesus is making a point out of contrast, we will get the idea that God must be argued with or bribed into answering our prayers. But if a poor widow can get an uncaring, unjust judge to answer her request by perseverance, then how much more could we expect the righteous judge, our God, who does care, will answer the request of his children's persistent prayers? Listen, you are important to God. Listen, you are precious to God. You are chosen by God. Is prayer worth it? Yes, because I'm God's child. You need to know you have a special relationship with God. You are not some distant relative or a kid down the street that has limited or no access to God. Now, this should encourage us more to keep making our requests known to God when we realize how special we are to God, how much God loves us and how much he cares for us. We should be that much more moved and inclined and motivated to be persistent in our prayers and never give up. I want you to notice that in verse 7, Jesus specifically refers to us as his chosen ones. In other words, you are special to a caring God. Therefore, you can expect an answer to your persistent prayers, even more so than the widow in the parable did. If it worked for her, then it is much more likely to work for you. This is an incentive, a motivation to keep on praying. God does care and can be expected to respond to our prayers because of who he is and because of who we are to him by his grace. When we understand that we are special to God, it will change our whole prayer life. It will change the way we live our lives. It will change the lives of those around us. So my resolve is to keep on praying. See, I'm going to keep on praying because I expect God to listen and respond to my requests. God has obligated himself to hear and respond to my prayer, whether the answer is yes, whether the answer is no, or whether the answer is wait. I will keep on praying because God is where my help comes from. If I know that my help comes from the Lord, then I can do a lot of things after I pray, but I cannot do anything until I pray. And hear me, I don't expect God to listen and respond because I have some great faith. I don't expect God to listen and respond because I fasted or prayed for many hours. I don't expect God to listen and respond because I've been exceptionally righteous or very devoted in my religious activity. I expect God to hear and respond because of who God is. God will respond because he is wonderful, because he is caring, because he loves me, because he sees me as special. It was nothing that I did to make him love me, nothing that I did to promote him to send Jesus for me, nothing that I did for God to choose me. He did it because he loves me and he loves you. And that is why I keep on praying. And that's why I will never give up, because Jesus never gave up on me. He was beat mercifully, nailed to the cross, and Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." So Jesus is saying to us this morning, it doesn't matter in season or out of season, as a matter of life or death, we must be persistent in our prayers. The main point that Jesus is making is that unlike the unjust judge, there is no reluctance on God's part to answer our prayers. Then you may ask, why then is there such a delay at times in answering our prayers? Why is it a delay at all? Jesus does not directly answer that question, but I think the latter part of verse 8 gives us a clue. Jesus asks an interesting question here. He says, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? This question is interesting because Jesus was not talking about faith. He was talking about persevering in prayer. Why then did he ask this question on faith in the context of prayer? And I think the answer is that persevering prayer and faith go hand in hand. As I said earlier, our prayer life is a reflection of our relationship with God. Our relationship with God will never be greater than our prayer life. Therefore, faith and prayer are commingled, and one is evidence of the other. When God delays answering our prayers, it is not because he is reluctant to bless his children, but I believe one reason he delays is to test and strengthen our faith, which is more valuable to God than gold is to us. As we close, I want to ask a question. And this is not a question of a yes or no. I want you to really meditate on this as you go through the week. If Jesus were to come this week, would he find faith in your life? Would he find you persevering in prayer through your circumstances? Or would he find that you had quit praying because you didn't really believe that God would show up in your situation? I hope that Jesus would find us all persisting in believing prayer. Why? Because now we know prayer is worth it. I want to thank you today for joining us. And I pray that you're here next week when we continue in our study of parables in chapter 13 of Matthew. We're going to discuss the parable of the weeds. So have a great week. Amen. And God bless you.